Okay, our next video today is about threat prevention. So the last one we were talking about different threats that might affect networks and computers. Now, what can we do to stop them? Well, firstly, I did mention in that video about having antivirus software and keeping that up to date, and scanning the computer hard drive and any other devices that you attach, for that matter, like pen drives. But there's more to it than that, and it starts with just some really basic things like having a strong password. I'm one of those people who's had the same password for everything for years, and it's not good news, but it's difficult to come up with sensible passwords for everything all the time. So what I came up with, first of all, was, my password used to be, and I don't use this anymore, so you don't need to try it. But let's just say, for example, that my password for everything was banana01. Okay? Not a very good password. Could be easily guessed if people know that I like bananas. So then what you can do is you can do simple things like you can alternate every letter between uppercase and lowercase. And you've got a slightly better password. It's a little bit harder for someone to guess, but they could maybe still try that. So then what you could do is you could say, all right, then, well, instead of using the numbers, I'll use the symbols on the keyboard that represent, that are just above them. So I've got the close bracket for a 0 and the exclamation mark for a 1. And there you go. But it's good, but it's still not fantastic. And some websites demand that you have a number, a lowercase letter, an uppercase letter, and some symbols. So then what I decided to do was I decided, well, I'll also put at the start of my password a number, the same number every time, and the first 2 letters of the website that I'm accessing. So for example, if it was Twitter, it might be 1, T, W, and then my password. Okay, and it becomes a little bit better again. So you can sort of come up with a system for passwords that you can use on different websites where the main chunk of your password is always the same, but it's got a little bit that's bespoke to every website that you might log into or every service that you might access. But having strong passwords is key, making sure that it's at least 8 characters long, because the longer it is, the more different possible combinations of letters, numbers and characters there are before a computer could crack it. Using uppercase and lowercase letters, including special characters, avoiding real dictionary words. If you can make up a word, it's even better. Avoiding personal information like the name of a pet or a family member. And then regular changing your password as well. And never use it for more than one system. So, not using the same password everywhere. One of the best pieces of advice I ever heard for a good password was picking a key phrase and then taking the first letter of each word of that phrase, put a few numbers in and characters, and you've got something that nobody else could guess. You could even say the phrase and they wouldn't necessarily know what you meant. So starting with the basics and getting a good password and not sharing it with people is key. So many students in school share the password with each other, and it only takes one person to log on as you and do something that they shouldn't do, and it's you that's in trouble, not them, because it's your username that it would come up under. So computer-based protection and detection. Obviously, we talked about firewalls. They control the transmission of data between a computer and a network. They can be configured to apply rules to certain programs, websites or network configurations, and they can either be software-based or hardware-based. So you can install a firewall, or you can purchase a physical device that acts as a firewall, which might be more useful on a network, whereas the software might be more useful on a home PC. You can get anti-malware software, which is designed to spot malicious viruses like the worms and the Trojan horses that we talked about in one of the earlier videos, and remove it from your system. And these have got to be regularly kept up to date. So you might have a subscription with Norton or AVG, and part of the deal there is that that they're researching, they're looking and finding these new viruses, and and then they're updating their database of them so that your software then knows about them, and if it spots one, it can delete it for you. Obviously, you can also encrypt things, so that could be as simple as password protecting, encrypting with a password, a file on your computer, for example. But encryption, obviously, we'll talk about this in another video, but it converts information using a public encryption key into a meaningless form that can't be read if it's intercepted. So if somebody picks it up along the way, it won't mean anything to them. And the only way to decrypt it is with the private key or the cipher. And we'll talk a bit more about ciphers in our Caesar cipher video. The encrypted text and the cipher are never transmitted together. So you might get one, but not the other. And that means that the data is more secure. Obviously, you can then... So those are some examples of computer-based protection and detection. You can move up then to managing protection and testing. So, network policies which are written by the owners of large networks set out practical rules that all users should follow, like not giving your username and password to somebody. They can relate to password privacy, so having a policy about how many characters the password needs to be, and a policy about not sharing it. The use of personal devices, because of course if you bring a personal device into work like a pen drive and you've got a virus from home, you can infect the system at work or in school. The backing up of data and acceptable network use, like which websites you can and can't access. Network forensics, where we monitor and record network traffic to make sure that any attacks can be analysed and that the resulting information can be used in subsequent investigations. And penetration testing, which is something that network managers might do to find potential problems and vulnerabilities within a system that could be exploited for criminal purposes. Some companies will actually reward people who find a vulnerability in their network and report it to them, or if they find a vulnerability in some software and report it to them. And these companies will also employ people whose job it is to try and hack into the network to find where the weaknesses are so that they can be fixed. And then security issues and computer users. Users are usually the weakest link in any system, but threats can be minimised. So, I have access to some files on my computer here in school that some other members of staff don't have access to because they're specific to my role. If I leave my computer unlocked and walk away from it, somebody who doesn't have access to those files could access them through my system. That's an example of why we say that the user's usually the weakest link. Me writing down my password or leaving my computer unlocked, we could have the best system in the world and the best security, and I could be the one that lets it fail. So, restricting access to certain files for people that they can, files that they can access, files that they can read but not edit, is a way of protecting personal information and making sure that only the right people can see the relevant stuff. And obviously we've talked about passwords as being essential in preventing authorised access to a computer system. But remember, they do have to be complicated enough that they're not easily guessed. We've talked about what makes a strong password. My challenge to you now after watching this video is that you go away and you make sure your passwords are secure. You come up with a system for not using the same password on every service and website you log into, and you make sure that your details are as hard for somebody else to crack as you possibly can. Just to recap on this section, we've talked about threat prevention in this clip. We talked about computer-based protection and detection using firewalls, antivirus software, anti-malware software, and encryption. We've talked about how network providers and network managers might have detailed network policies that detail what can and can't be done on the network and ways that the users are responsible for keeping it safe. We've talked about network forensics and penetration testing. We've talked about security issues and computer issues, where we talked about how the user is often the weakest link, how there are different access levels, user access levels, so that you can access only what you need and nothing more. Imagine if I had access to find out how much everybody got paid in school, and I then use that information for the wrong purposes, either to show off or to complain. There's an example of information that I don't have access to, or maybe only the principal has access to. And using passwords to prevent unauthorised access to computer systems. We talked about what a strong password is, giving you some top tips to make sure that you have a strong password yourself, and that is threat prevention.